Hey again. So today I'm going to be starting a somewhat new series based on an email that I received from one of you about relational dynamics with specific types in a familial sense, in a work sense, in an everyday sense, and really just how we engage with types that may be difficult for us to understand, just differences in perspective and behavior and sin patterns. This specific email was addressing Enneagram 3 in a familial sense, and kind of just how do I engage with someone when they have patterns that I don't understand. And so we'll be addressing that today, starting with Enneagram 3. Now, I personally have some experience with this one. I have two family members that, one through biology, one through marriage, that are Enneagram 3s. So I really have experience with this one and understand. I think I should preface too and say that we all have different triggers when it comes to behaviors or certain things that trigger us in a negative way, and a lot of that has to do with maybe things we were raised with, or even just ways in which are opposite to our own viewpoints. And when we address these topics, I think it's really important to kind of adjust our expectations and remember two things. One is that we're all broken in one way or another, and that's what contributes to these sin patterns and to these tendencies that sometimes irk us in other people. And number two, just that we are also in that boat, and that a lot of times our own flaws and our own brokenness tends to ricochet against other people's. So when we are talking about how do we interact with people who have different tendencies, it's really important to consider our own as well, and not just consider, what is this person doing to annoy me, but what does this tell me about myself that I'm having trouble responding to that. When we look at the Enneagram, when we use the Enneagram as a tool, it's really important to be focused on self-growth and self-awareness. And what one very wise Enneagram teacher that I know said, self-observation, and just really not making this about other people and how they're a problem in our lives, as much as that can be true, but realizing that in equal part we are also responsible for negative patterns. So going to Enneagram 3 and talking about just some of the dynamics and some of the insecurities that Enneagram 3 has. This specific email addressed a few different tendencies that can be problematic with Enneagram 3. Now, one of these is competitiveness, competition. One of them is kindred to that, which is comparison, and it's intending to have kind of a one-upping tendency that this person described, and I've witnessed myself as well in these relationships, as a tendency to really listen with only the intent of building up the self. So a lot of times that can look like, oh, I met this person at the grocery store the other day, and they're like really into sports, and then that Enneagram 3 would hear that and say, how can I match that? How can I be as good? How can I have something as exciting? And instead of listening with an others-focused perspective, they listen with that self-focused perspective that honestly all heart types have in some way or another, that self-focused perspective of how can I increase my value? And I think that when we interact with 3s who have that tendency, it's really important to remember, and has been important for myself to remember the kind of like child perspective that 3 had, that they grew up in to make them think that way. And that is this mindset of, I have no value and I have no worth if I am not the best. And kind of addressing that from the perspective of compassion and saying, oh wow, like that's kind of screwed up, and like that's kind of like hard. And not only is it hard, but that's not true. Like you, the Enneagram 3, like you have value and you have intrinsic worth. Regardless of whether you're the best or regardless of whether you win. And I think that that's actually an inlet that we have, an opportunity when dealing with 3 family members or 3 friends. As frustrating as it can be to have someone constantly make things about themselves and about how they're better than you, believe me, I understand that frustration. It's a very hard one for me as well. But I've learned over the years, specifically in regards to my dad, actually, who's an Enneagram 3, that it's so important to see that brokenness at the heart of it and say, okay, like, I know that actually this has to do with their insecurities and their self-worth, and I need to rise above their behavior enough to see what is it that's causing that. As I always say with Enneagram, not what are they doing, but why are they doing it? And with Enneagram 3, that is that core really view of the self as less than or as worthless without those star stickers and those medals and those trophies and those achievements. And realizing that when 3s present themselves as awesome and great and like better than you, it's actually this chip on the shoulder attempt to make the self feel valuable. And as frustrating as that can be, it really helps to see it from that perspective and to step into that situation with that in mind and encourage them in a way that says, you know what, even if you don't win, like, even if you aren't the best, I value you, and choosing to value them and praise them verbally for things that have nothing to do with achievement. I think it's really important, and I've seen this in my relationship with my dad. It's very important to point out those things and say, you know, giving praise for things that aren't fame-based, that aren't money-based, that aren't popularity-based, and saying things like, hey, like, I love the way you hug me, or like, I love that conversation that we had about the shared interest of ours, and really just valuing things that have to do with their intrinsic self. The text for Enneagram 3 says that when they're very young, they sacrifice their heart's desire in order to live up to the culture's ideals. Like, youch. I mean, that is rough. For a little child to have to say, you know what, like, what my heart really desires can't be important because I have to succeed, I have to have value. And we have to see that little child in every Enneagram type when we're dealing with ones that rub us the wrong way, but specifically for 3, it has to do with that value and that being loved for really the blemished, unmasked version of themselves, and accepting them for who they are and saying, you know what, come as you are. Not just valuing the facade that they put up that shows this perfectionistic self. So I think that that's really the perspective in which I would recommend approaching 3s. I know it can be a challenge with every type, and we have to constantly reset ourselves. I think whatever Enneagram type that you are, that you're functioning from when dealing with 3s, it's important to reset the self at points of frustration and step back, maybe take a breath and say, okay, if this person is acting like a child, in whatever way that manifests, regarding which Enneagram type we're talking about, like, come on, because every Enneagram type acts like a child in some way. So if this person is choosing to act like a child, I need to, hear me when I say this carefully, treat them like a child. And I'm not saying treat them like a child in the sense of don't give them respect, but treat them like a child in the sense of compassion and tenderness, and saying, you know what, maybe they're not far along enough yet for me to treat them with that pure sense of self-awareness. Maybe I need to treat them a little bit more like a mentor, or like somebody who wants to understand them. And really remembering that we have an opportunity to ask questions and to say, yeah, why do you feel that way? Or really try to explore what's underneath that. Now, on that note, I have to say Enneagram 3 in particular is not great at self-awareness. They're very uncomfortable with the underlayers because of that fear of not being loved for who they are underneath, and because they have sacrificed their heart's desire. So to some extent, they're very separated from it. I think most 3s don't even really know who they are. And I think that's something, like, sit with that for a second. Like, most 3s don't really know who they are. And I say that from, again, the perspective of compassion and realizing, you know what, that's hard, and I want to be able to encourage them, especially if it's somebody in your family or somebody that you really would like to love better. Being able to say, I want to help you figure out who you are, and encourage you to be who that is regardless of what our culture praises. Yeah, and applying that charm and prowess and achievement orientation, which are really gifts. I mean, threes have a gift for knowing what people want, for marketing, for being able to present something in a way that is tactful. So really it's integration to 6 looks like taking those gifts and applying them not to the self and not to the image I want people to see, but applying them to whatever the group dynamic is, to the team at work, to the family, to whatever that culture looks like. As 6s do, focus on the culture and saying, you know what, I really want to better the group. I want to better the people around me, and I'm gonna not worry about my self-value. I'm gonna worry about using those gifts to really liberate and empower the community around me. So that's a huge shift for 3. So if a 3 in your life, if you see sparks of that, encourage that. That's something I think that applies across the board in relational dynamics. Is look at integration for the Enneagram type that you're wrestling with, and look at what their integration means for them, and encourage it when you see little glimpses of it in them. And when you see disintegration, walk alongside them and say, encourage them, but also ask them questions. You may actually want to introduce them to the Enneagram too, honestly. I think that there are certain types that are more open to, as we said before, self-awareness and self-investigation. And if they're not, that's okay too. But yeah, so I think this kind of covers the spectrum of some of those questions and how to respond to an Enneagram 3. I want to make one final note, which is maybe how not to respond to Enneagram 3. Growing up, and this has a lot to do with my own issues, as I said at the beginning of the video, but growing up with a dad who's a 3, I really, just from a natural place, I'm a 4 with a 5 wing, so from a natural place of my own issues and ricocheting off of my dad's, my negative response to his desire for approval, because that is one of the 3's desires that we see over and over again, is this desire for pet me, pet me, pet me, tell me I'm good, tell me I'm the best, tell me you like me. And that can get very agitating, especially for an introvert. And my response that I would not recommend was to shut down and say, no, I don't approve of you, get away from me, ew. That's a very childlike response. So I would say if you're doing that to the Enneagram 3 that you know, they're probably going to continue to disintegrate. They're probably going to continue to think, oh, I'm not good enough. I need to do more. I need to achieve more. I need to be like this person in order for them to approve of me. So the more that you shut an Enneagram 3 down like that, and I can say this from experience, the more you say, no, I don't approve of you, no, I don't like you, that's really going to cause them to disintegrate. Now, I'm not saying you have to pet them and give them the value that they're seeking through image, but as I said before, make sure that you are giving them approval through who they are underneath. And when you see them, focus on others, not on the self. So yeah, just encourage that integration and the behaviors you see in that. And continue to be patient with everyone. I mean, regardless of Enneagram type, we're all fighting a hard battle, and we're all struggling with our own sin patterns. So that's sort of the basic advice I would give for your relational dynamics with Enneagram 3. I'm definitely going to continue this series. If there's a specific Enneagram type in your family or work life or whatever that you are struggling with, hey, send me an email. I'd love to hear more details about it so that for the next installment of this, I can address those specific questions. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time.